If you've ever lived in a neighborhood where everything was controlled by a controlling individual, if you've ever kept quiet for fear of trouble, if you've ever felt forced to live by norms that weren't yours, this story is for you. It's a reminder that laws should serve the community, not reinforce individual power. And that change is possible as long as you dare to speak up, to know your rights. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't let silence empower the manipulator. It only takes one person to stand up and a whole community can change. Don't forget to like, share, or follow so you don't miss out on the next exciting developments. Now let's explore the story together. I started renovating the house in early April, when the spring breeze was just warm enough to remove the roof and replace the doors without worrying about unexpected rain. I had prepared everything carefully for months: the home improvement permit from the city, the application to the HOA, including detailed drawings, a list of materials, paint colors, fence heights, and even the distance from the windows to the trees. I didn't miss a single detail. My experience in this neighborhood taught me that nothing escapes the scrutiny of the HOA, especially when the person in charge for all these years is Karen. A person who can send a 3-page warning letter if the doormat is not the right color. I don't mind rules, as long as they are reasonable. The house I bought was an old house, built in the 90s, with 3 owners and wearing the worn shell of time. Broken tile roof, warped wooden doors, peeling paint in patches. I wanted to completely renovate in a modern architectural style, not only to better suit my living needs, but also because I believed the neighborhood deserved more houses that were truly alive, not drab corpses bound by the old notion of uniformity. When I submitted my application to the HOA, I even included a before and after comparison, stating that I would keep the basic structure intact, without touching the foundation or changing the function of the space. All I did was freshen up, replace the tile roof with a lighter composite roof that still matched the approved color, repaint the walls with a mold-resistant paint in the HOA's earth-neutral color palette, and rebuild the reclaimed wood fence to the same height as the old one. I read every provision in the HOA handbook, including the little footnotes. I submitted my application 2 weeks early, got an automated email response, and was approved in just 3 days. Everything was legal. Everything was in order. I wasn't a fan of attention, much less confrontation. My renovations weren't about proving anything. They were simply about living in a space I had created, a place I could call home without having to pretend to be satisfied with allowed things that weren't in my heart. But the thoroughness, the quiet, the rationality were what Karen couldn't stand. She was used to residents furtively asking for permission, fearfully waiting for approval, bowing their heads to each reminder email, each thick copy of the regulations in the folder she carried with her to every community meeting. Not me. I didn't break the rules, nor did I bend the rules. I went straight to the rules and beyond. I knew the rules better than she did. I understood the HOA's powers and limitations. I knew the HOA had no right to reject a request that met all the requirements. I didn't ask for permission like someone who needed a favor. I reported like someone who understood my responsibilities and rights. And it was this lack of compromise that Karen couldn't forgive. I knew Karen didn't need to say anything. Just the way she showed up on the day the construction crew started work was enough. Her eyes scanned every piece of lumber, every coil of wire, as if hunting for a flaw. But she found nothing. This time, the person she was trying to dominate was no longer a docile resident, but me, who had marched straight into her territory with an unshakable position. From the moment the first truck pulled up in front of the house, Karen began to follow like a shadow. Every morning when I opened my window, I saw her standing across the street, clutching the old leather notebook that had been her weapon at HOA meetings. One day, while the crew was roofing, She raised her camera with a zoom lens, stood in the middle of the common walkway, and took pictures of every unpainted corner. No words were spoken, but it was clear that she was silently collecting evidence for a war that only she thought she had the upper hand in. Karen never missed an opportunity to check, from the way materials were brought into the yard to the sound of hammers hitting the walls at noon. One day I saw her crouched down on the front lawn, using a tape measure to measure the distance between the temporary floorboards and the edge of the walkway. She wrote something down in the notebook, then took a few steps back to look at the whole thing, frowned, and then bent down to measure again. Her manner was coldly precise, like that of an inspector tasked with detecting violations in an epidemic area. But the funny thing was, in that seriousness, I could sense a kind of simmering bitterness in the way she walked faster than usual, the way her lips pressed together as she watched the construction crew follow the instructions, the way she pretended not to look but stood there all morning. I didn't have to get close to know what she was trying to do. Her surveillance wasn't out of concern for the community, but to find the slightest crack in the legal veneer I'd built. A brick in the wrong place, a screw that didn't match the bill of materials, a temporary light bulb that didn't meet nighttime standards. Anything could become an excuse for Karen to do what she did best. I wrote a 3-page email with illustrations and exclamation marks at the end of the sentences. The construction workers were initially surprised to see a strange woman standing there taking notes and taking pictures every day, but gradually they understood and silently worked within the framework I had outlined. I told them from the beginning that there would be people watching, spying, trying to find ways to hinder them, but if they did everything right, no one could do anything. Karen's attitude was not one of anger, but of a kind of toxic persistence. She did not bang on the door, did not scream like the Karens often seen in old HOA stories. She was more sophisticated. Each time she appeared, it was a psychological attack, as if to remind me that she was still watching. But what she did not expect was that I did not waver. Her presence only made me more thorough, reviewing designs, inspecting construction, making sure every step was within the law. The very OA rules she used to manipulate others now became her own uncrossable boundaries. I didn't speak up. I didn't confront her. I didn't reflect on her behavior. I let her watch silently, helplessly, because I knew nothing drives a person who's used to giving orders to madness faster than not being able to stop something, no matter how hard they try. Every time I saw Karen standing at the end of the street, her helpless eyes turned toward my house, I knew exactly what she was feeling, not just a loss of control, but the bitter realization that the power that had once helped her control the whole neighborhood was no longer enough to stop a single person. And my house was a symbol of that truth. Before I started renovating my house, my villa was unremarkable. It was old, with yellowish-gray walls, crooked windows, and moss-covered tiled roof. But when things started to change, when the construction team removed the old walls and replaced them with large glass windows, bright white walls, and modern square lines, the house began to transform. It was not only beautiful, but also suitable for modern life, gentle but strong, liberal but full of personality. Not a fancy style, but a simple but delicate beauty, making everything around suddenly fade away. And Karen, with the strict look of a woman who always put herself above all, began to feel that my house was a slap in the face. She always considered herself the center of this neighborhood, the only one who had the right to decide what was right and what was wrong. My house, with its beauty that did not follow any of the standards she had set, made her feel as if she was being removed from the stage. She could not bear to see another house, even another person, standing out more than her. That was something she could not tolerate. The mornings when I saw her standing there, in the middle of the street, staring at the changes I had made, I knew it wasn't admiration. Not amusement, just a burning jealousy. She had been the neighborhood's model, the one who always made things perfect, the one everyone listened to. But now my house stood there, a new model, completely different and beyond the mold she had created. It was a challenge she couldn't ignore. Her jealousy was not just expressed in her cold eyes or her piercing gaze, but also in her soft, meaningful words. She began to criticize everything from the windows to the paint color, from the style of the roof tiles to the placement of the trees. Even though I did everything right, even though I complied with all the HOA rules, in her eyes I was still unreasonable. Not because I was wrong, but because she couldn't bear to see herself surpassed, to be overshadowed. And the more she did, the more she stood there silently, saying nothing, just silently observing. Her hands clasped tightly around her notebook, as if she were bracing herself against an unquenchable tide. I didn't have to say anything more. My house spoke for itself. The modern, refined lines made Karen's old villa look like an anachronistic relic, a reminder of an era the whole neighborhood wanted to forget. She not only felt left behind, but had to face a painful truth. The power that had once made her feared was now meaningless. And that slip, for someone like Karen, was not easy to accept. As the project neared completion, I began to hear whispers. I don't know who started it, but vague comments seemed to creep through every gate and morning walk. I heard she added an extra section without permission. That tiled roof doesn't seem to be on the approved list. Did she submit the application properly? No one directly accused me, nor did anyone confirm anything, just words that lingered, as if something was fishy waiting to be exposed. And I knew who was behind the drama. Karen didn't openly oppose me, knowing that doing so would only make her look petty and vulnerable to retaliation. Instead, she chose the more familiar way of sowing doubt. The insinuations were uttered during walks with a few acquaintances, or when she happened to see someone watering the plants in the front yard. I'm not sure if she submitted the right Schedule C, the kind that's meant for facade alterations, or I hope she didn't use substandard materials, or it could affect the whole neighborhood, especially in terms of insurance. She always spoke in a low voice, just enough to be heard without being accusatory, but enough to light a small fire in the wary imaginations of residents who had lived under her rule. I didn't need anyone to tell me where these words came from. Karen had a way of sowing suspicion, never directly, but always at the right time. She picked the most vulnerable moments, when a mower was heard making a loud noise, when a new package arrived, or when an unfamiliar car pulled up near my front door. These innocuous details became a pretext for a series of questions, and in the closed world of a neighborhood accustomed to uniformity, differences were easily blown into wrongs. I wasn't surprised when some of the neighbors began to keep their distance, polite but wary. Their eye contact was less natural, and their morning greetings became brief, sometimes completely absent. I understood that this was not out of malice, but out of a self-defense mentality that Karen had deliberately triggered. They were so used to listening to one person that when that person seemed unsure about something, they reflexively became skeptical, not because they hated me, but because they feared they would be left out if they didn't stand with the majority. Karen didn't need proof. She just planted a seed, and the rest would grow on its own, in the way humans are more willing to believe in the negative than the obvious. She knew that if she made people doubt me, no matter how beautiful my house was, I would still become a disturber of the community, in their minds. That was how she protected her old role, not by law, but by public opinion. She couldn't beat me in court, but she tried to create a social court where a skeptical look would be enough to put me on the scale. I'm old enough to know that the truth can't be buried under a layer of rumors. If Karen chooses to fight with whispers, I'll let the house I built with proper blueprints, real cement, and clear permits speak for me. She may sow doubt for a moment, but there's no denying what's looming large in the middle of the neighborhood. I've gotten used to the prying eyes, the innuendos, and the quiet wariness of some neighbors. But I didn't expect Karen to go so far as to file a formal complaint. One Monday morning, I received an email from the HOA secretary with an attached complaint against Project 37 for violating the code. Though anonymous, the tone was familiar, cold, precise, and manipulative. The charges were clearly listed: unapproved materials, potentially toxic paint, improper facade adjustments. Everything is quoted as if it has weight, but completely lacking in concrete evidence, a clever construction, just to force me to bow my head and explain. I didn't feel angry when I read the petition, only a cold fatigue. Perhaps because I understood the motive behind it very well. Karen couldn't stop me from building, nor could she turn people away from me completely, so she resorted to the last resort, administrative procedures. She knew that with just one official complaint, however unreasonable, I would have to suspend some projects, explain in writing, and spend time proving my innocence, while she would lose nothing but a few free afternoons and a name to sign the petition. It was a familiar game for those who used to hold the scales, but no longer held the handle of the knife. I immediately contacted the contractor and the architect, asking them to review the entire file. Every sample of material I used, from roof tiles, planks, to environmentally friendly water-based paint, had been approved in writing, with attached quality inspection reports from the supplier. I not only did it right, but I did it beyond the standard. Every small change was noted with an adjustment note and reapproved by the HOA before construction began. The architect also responded directly to the association secretary that the actual drawings had not been adjusted illegally, and that all structures were completely consistent with the approved design. In other words, the entire complaint was unfounded. Even so, it took me more than a week to process all the feedback requests, supplement the documents, resend valid scans, and wait for each item to be verified. During that time, I temporarily stopped the construction of the facade and main entrance, only maintaining the interior items. The construction team had to temporarily delay the progress, and I had to stop once again, not because of any real violations, but because a person could not accept the fact that he could no longer control everything as he wanted. Karen didn't need to win the case. She just needed to tire me out, slow me down, make me doubt myself, or at least cast a shadow of uncertainty in the eyes of outsiders, if only for a moment. I didn't respond to the complaint with an attack, nor did I name names. I let the paperwork do the talking, letting the numbers and technical details refute the arbitrary subjectivity. But I knew, for those accustomed to control, the feeling of being ignored is even more unpleasant than being dismissed. That was what Karen couldn't stand, that I wasn't wrong, and that I didn't even bother to play by her rules. What made me laugh wasn't the content of the complaint, which was full of vague speculation, but the fact that Karen didn't know that I was the current president of the Residents' Council, the person who had directly handled the complaint. An incredible lack of observation from someone who claimed to know every brick in this neighborhood. But it was understandable. She never considered me a significant opponent. When I ran, Karen didn't even show up for the election, probably thinking that if she didn't show up, the seat would be waiting for her to return. But the neighborhood was tired of the old rules, and I, who knew the law well enough, was patient enough and sober enough, and I was the one who sat in the position that she had considered her own domain. The petition was forwarded to my official email, according to the procedure. I read it line by line, noted the points that were unfounded, listed the content that overlapped with the time she had filed complaints in the name of a regular resident, and then checked the approved minutes. Everything was clean, clear, and complete. No violations, no signs of ambiguity. There was no reason to move this petition to the official processing stage. I could have responded bluntly, brushing aside the absurdity, but instead I chose a different approach, legal, standard, and just sarcastic enough to make her face the truth she was trying to deny. I drafted a formal response, opening with thanks for your deep concern for transparency and community building standards, and asserting that the contents of the petition have been cross-checked and verified as not being subject to current regulations. I politely quoted every provision of the bylaw that Karen herself had helped draft to show that I was not rejecting her on impulse, but rather using the very system she believed to be inviolable to refute her. I signed my full name, with my title, President of the Evergreen Neighborhood Council, and sent it back in the proper public format. I didn't expect a response, but I knew she would read it. She would read it again and again, linger on the signature, and see in it not just a name, but an undeniable truth, that the person she had tried to exclude from this community, once considered an outsider, now sat at the top of the governing structure she had once single-handedly manipulated. And worse, he didn't need to get angry, didn't need to mention the past, didn't need to declare victory, just did what was right, in the right role, with the right authority, enough to make her feel like she was out of place and out of time. Karen had thought that a single complaint would be enough to shake up what I had built. But what she didn't expect was that the system no longer operated according to her own will. It was no longer a tool for power, but returned to its true nature, protecting the common good. When the complaint could not slow down progress, did not stir public opinion, it reflected only one thing: her era had ended. I did not think I would witness that moment. Karen, who had once held all the power in meetings, now retreated to a corner, silent and bitter. The residents' council meeting took place in the familiar hall, where she could change the agenda with a frown. But that day, I was the one who walked in as chair, greeted with sympathetic looks. No one asked, "What do you think, Karen?" Nor did anyone look at the third chair on the left. The chair was still occupied, but there was only a silent figure, no longer weighty. As I presented the contents related to the construction progress, the renovation of the old housing area, and especially the new policy on flexible design within the allowed scope, I clearly saw each face nodding, each look brightening because of the realization that the community was gradually breaking free from the rigid shell of the old years. A few people spoke up to contribute more ideas, suggesting more diverse house models, even mentioning my own house as a typical example of both complying with regulations and creating harmony and novelty. All the compliments were aimed at what had made Karen bitter for so long, that I had done the right thing but did it better than she had ever imagined. I let the extended discussion unfold naturally, without rushing to direct it, because Karen's silence at this moment was the clearest evidence of the shift in the balance of influence. No one looked at her as a representative anymore. The insinuations she had once thrown were now neutralized by the consensus of the crowd. The doubts she sowed little by little have now become an old story that no one bothers to mention again. I'm not one to brag about victories, but I know the value of silence in a room where she once controlled the conversation with her voice. It was an unspoken humiliation, an inescapable loss of presence, a moment when the spotlight was no longer on her, not because she was being excluded, but simply because she was no longer needed. Karen sat there throughout the meeting, offering no response, no comment, no rebuttal, something that had not happened in 10 years. She just stared at the document in front of her, as if hoping it would hide her confused gaze. No one called her name, no one turned to ask for her opinion. Even though I had cleverly created enough silences for the former moderator to speak, she still said nothing. Perhaps because she knew that any words she uttered would only expose a more painful truth, that her time was over. And no one wanted to prolong a dynasty they had once endured because they saw no other way. The meeting ended in an atmosphere of strange relief. Everyone left their seats with a relaxed attitude, discussing playgrounds, streetlights, seasonal plants. No one looked back at Karen. As for me, as I gathered up my papers and stood up, I just looked at her silently. No triumph, no pity, just a quiet moment between two eras, one ending, one beginning. As clear as my signature at the bottom of the meeting minutes. Karen did not leave immediately, but her presence faded like old paint on a forgotten wall. She still lived in the house that had once been a HOA standard, still walked every morning with a notebook in hand, still tried to maintain the appearance of authority. But it was all just old habits in a space that no longer listened. No one asked her to review papers. No one asked for her opinion on home repairs. No one pretended to listen to reminders that no longer carried weight. In a community that had once run on fear, being forgotten was the most severe form of punishment. The control she had exerted over the neighborhood did not come from reason or logic. It was a kind of silent authority, one that made people choose silence over confrontation, obedience over argument. Karen never gave direct orders, but everyone understood that to go against her meant trouble. Perhaps that was why, for years, no one dared to question such ridiculous rules as the maximum curvature of the curtains when viewed from the outside, or the time allowed for music at backyard birthday parties. These rules were enforced not by law, but by invisible pressure. And Karen, with her skillful manipulation, had maintained a system of compliance based on insecurity. My presence was not, in a sense, a rebellion. I did not disrupt the system. I did not overthrow Karen through a confrontational act. I simply stepped into the framework she created, but operated with a different mindset, transparent, fair, and depersonalized power. I didn't take down the HOA, I just made it function as it was originally designed to protect the common good, not to serve the feelings or power of an individual. And that, for Karen, was the fatal blow. Because no one can fight against something that was once yours but no longer listens. I don't gloat when I see that collapse. There is a part of me that still feels sorry for Karen, not because she lost her position, but because she never understood that power is not sustainable if it is built on fear. She didn't see the opportunity to transform herself, to become an advisor, a keeper of the community spirit by listening and sharing. Instead, she chose to cling to a crumbling empire, continuing to use the same old methods to maintain the illusion of influence, and pushing herself into isolation when the world around her had turned a different page. My house, by the end of summer, was finished. Every morning the sunlight shone through the large glass windows, reflecting on the warm earth tone paint, creating a new life, not only for the space I lived in, but also for the breath of the neighborhood. Neighbors began to proactively renovate the garden, asking for design opinions, discussing further changes in the rules. Everything gradually became more flexible, more open, but still within consensus. I did not need to impose anything, because the community itself had chosen to let go of the past. And in that journey of transformation, Karen gradually became a memory. Not a symbol of cruelty to be erased, but a past phase, a mark to be remembered so as not to repeat. Her story did not end with an explosion, but with a quiet retreat like an empire with no one to bow before it. Have you ever met a Karen in your life? Someone who always thinks he is right, always interfering in other people's lives with imposing rules? When faced with injustice, what matters is not how much power you have, but how well you understand your rights. Being steadfast, understanding the law and acting within the framework is the most sustainable way to fight against arbitrary control. Sometimes you don't need to protest loudly. Just do the right thing, make it clear, and do it to the end. then the wrong will reveal itself and collapse. Don't be afraid of change, be the one to start it. If you find this story interesting, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and follow so you don't miss other interesting stories.